Thanks for your presentation. And as you resigned 4 years ago, why are we still speaking about Russia's influence and so deep into U.S., Europe's politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question. I think when I resigned, I felt that it was a turning point for Russian disinformation, especially as it pertains to Ukraine. And I think it's just gotten so much worse. The problem has not abated. It's only gotten worse. And we're talking about it as a national security issue in the United States. Ukraine, since 2014, that war is still going on. And just recently, in the last 48 hours, there's been a new, is that saying that my time's up or something?
No.
I don't know what that
No,
was, but
no.
I'm just gonna ignore it. Yeah, the conflict in Ukraine is still going on, and in just the last 24 hours, there was actually the first violent confrontation that I know of since 2014, where Russians fired on Ukrainian ships, took 20 Ukrainians captive. So that is still ongoing. So we're still talking about what's going on.
About this incident that you are mentioning now, this is about the Azov Sea, the Kerch Strait, where the ships are going through. And about this, we could see that Western media, not just the state-sponsored media like RT or Sputnik, but the Western media mostly were also not really into the details, and so it was confusing in the first to read about this. Are Western media as journalists a little too lazy to really deep into what's happening, and then just they are following after, because there were data already on the very first moment?
Well, I think you bring up a really good point. I don't want to be mean and call them all lazy, but we are so engulfed in our own inner turmoil that I think what happens in Ukraine and what happens abroad now is kind of taking a back seat. This was something that was aggressive enough that we had to pay attention to it. But I think for all journalists, that is something that we need to we're seeing the same mistakes being made in 2014, where, and I'm a really strong opponent of this type of reporting, where it's like, okay, Petro Poroshenko, the Ukrainian president, said this, Vladimir Putin said this, and you have a media outlet that's reporting both things as if they're both equally true. And what happens in this case is that instead of getting closer to the truth, it's just more in a fog of, okay, well, what happened? There needs to be more of an awareness that, there is one side that is trying to manipulate the reality of what had happened. And so I think we're still talking about it, and I think we're talking about it more actually in 2018, because it's become so salient in the United States that disinformation, hybrid warfare has been used in the United States, and it's something that countries all over Europe, all over the world really, I think with digital news and social media playing such a big role in how people get information, that we're still trying to figure out how to address this.
I was saying about this laziness, not just about what I think about those, but there was already opinion on The Economist in 2010 that there's such Eurosceptic opinion in Britain, just because British journalists are usually using NGOs who are Eurosceptic and making researches, and they have such a good researchers, so you don't have to research yourself, and they are following these NGOs that are Eurosceptic, and that's why the whole Britain is more Eurosceptic.
Right.
Already in 2010, a long time before Brexit. So do you believe that the laziness and... I do,
and I think that's what you're getting. I mean, hopefully journalists, they shouldn't be lazy, but I think that's why I'm a proponent of media literacy, because it requires you to think critically. And sometimes it's very it's challenging. It's easier to sit back and just not pay attention and just be like, whatever. This article makes me feel good, so I'm going to believe it. I think that kind of mentality among the news consumers is something that is taken advantage of. So I think journalists do need to be more vigorous in reporting the facts and staying away from this notion of both sidesism. You can be objective, and it's important to, but I think what I've learned through my experience is when you give both sides equal weight, when there's one side that's actually trying to manipulate the very notion of truth, you're not doing anybody a service by saying both sides are just as relevant.
Why are the lawmakers so lacking back? After something happens, there are several years passing by.
Yeah.
Since something is done.
Well, I think the administration has been it's kind of been such a circus and such a distraction. But there has been talk with the new Congress up that some of this legislation in terms of putting sanctions on Russia and beefing up our own response to disinformation, that will be something that will be prioritized. We'll wait and see, but that's a good question.
You have tweeted that U.S. democracy is now even in worse situation than it was before midterm elections, because those Republicans that are in are more Trumpist than before.
Oh yeah.
So do you believe that's really going through what you're saying?
Well, we'll see. There's been definitely with the Republican Party in the U.S., it's become more of a Trumpist party. I think because of this populist approach and populist nationalist approach that has resonated with a lot of Americans for various reasons. I think I had mentioned this kind of anti-globalization, anti-elite, anti-establishment. All that really resonates with a lot of Americans. I think it was underestimated how much that does resonate. It resonated in Britain. It resonated in France. Not to the same degree, arguably, but I think that these factors played a very big role, and with that, with kind of the perfect storm and having a foreign hostile power manipulate these existing problems, these existing divisions that we had in our country, that's problematic. We'll never know whether or not Russian interference actually swayed the election in one way or another, but in any regard, I think it was a big wake-up call for the United States and our allies to take this problem very seriously.
So far, you are a specialist in what Russia is doing now, expert
by accident.
But there are also other state-sponsored media, and like Qataris have Al Jazeera. Mm-hmm. China has whole network of different media. Mm-hmm. So we know not just about the pandas, but their values. And we see that media are overtaken by governments just here in Europe, in Poland, in Hungary.
Yeah.
And this has nothing to do with straight with Russia. Mm-hmm. So how to fight with these and what to do with these when actually the media are coming first, then comes politics, and the society already is led by these media, by politicians, already in made structure.
Actually, and you brought up Hungary, and I have some family in Hungary, so I'm a little bit sensitive to that. And it actually has been influenced by Russia, by pro-Russian sentiment there, and kind of a hailing back to kind of you have a lot of that anti-immigrant, let's blame George Soros for our country's woes, a lot of that conspiratorial thinking coming from Orban. But in terms of how to battle it, I think it's important to understand the root causes of this. Why do people believe in this kind of, why do people believe in fake news? Why do they?
Is it fear?
I think a lot of journalists would agree that there's been, as an economy shifts, there's been kind of a disillusionment, a widespread disillusionment in the United States. blue-collar workers feel weakened. They feel like they're not getting their voices heard, and so they thought, maybe here's a guy that's going to sweep in and make things better for us. So, it would be great if this was an actual candidate that had their interest at heart. I'm not sure if the facts and the way that things have played out has proven that. I think, but as I said, it's a multifaceted thing. I think it's awareness. It's the tech companies taking responsibility. It's journalists being aware, and so that they're informed in their reporting, so it doesn't influence their reporting. And in some instances, even some governments perhaps taking some sort of regulatory measures in terms of online regulation, harassment, hate speech, all of these things, because unfortunately we see that things that are online, they don't necessarily stay online. They have implications in the real world.
Recently I interviewed one fact checkers network leader who told me that researchers show that actually those who see fake news on Facebook, they composite no more than 10%, and mostly others are either not seeing fake news at all or seeing both fake news and real news, and they just choose to believe fake news mostly. Mm-hmm. But you are blaming Facebook and other social media.
Yeah, I am, and I'm going to continue to. There's some disputed scholarly work and studies. There was one that I saw that showed that most Americans actually were exposed to fake news during the election, and many recalled at least one fake news story. So there's disputing polls and scholarly work and all of that. And I think just coming from the rhetoric that I hear online and see online, and even hearing from my family members, Thanksgiving, I didn't want to go back because I didn't want to hear family members talk about fake news, and I got to correct them. But you get the sense that there's a real impact in the U.S. for sure, because people don't get these ideas out of thin air. They get them, and things start online. Conspiracy theories start online, but I think what we're seeing is this phenomenon of elites, whether it's in the media, through Breitbart, they get a conspiracy theory, starts online, and then it spreads when somebody like Sean Hannity will repeat it, or you have a member of the administration or the head of an executive repeating it, so it catches fire. Something that a false or distorted narrative that begins online can actually gain traction when it's repeated over and over again by somebody that has more clout, whether it be on Breitbart or a far-right website or our own government officials.
As you told that the society is more divided than ever since the civic war, do you feel that those who are fighting for democracy are also getting stronger?
I do. It was interesting. I went to the Women's March after the election, and it was really a remarkable scene in Washington, D.C. Like hundreds of thousands of people marching, and I think it's awakened democracy. Sometimes people get really comfortable. They don't pay attention to the news. They don't pay attention to politics. I have some friends that never really cared, but all of a sudden they're like, oh, wait, we should pay attention, So you see this resurgence of people realizing that it's important to participate in democracy and to stay informed. So I think if there's any positive, that we've seen a resurgence of people that are kind of waking up and saying, you know what, I got to play my role in this democratic process.
Do media also become stronger? Like the New York Times, or they kind of like...
Yeah. Our president calls it the failing New York Times, but their subscriptions have gone up.
Is it enough?
That's a difficult question, because I think a lot of people that want to make a difference and they want to support the media, they purchase a subscription. But there's the other side that will never, ever, ever, because they think it's fake news, so they're not going to read it. They're not going to read The Economist. They're not going to read The Washington Post. They're not going to read The New York Times. They go to, Fox News or RT in some cases because they have overlapping narratives now, and that's what they're going to believe. So we see kind of this division in the U.S. that I think is largely education-based, unfortunately. So there's in some regards, people are becoming more informed, and then in others, they're becoming less informed. And with the media, with the explosion of digital news and all these sources, there's been this long debate in political science about people being uninformed, but now I think there's this phenomenon of people being misinformed. Actually, it's beyond not knowing what's going on. It's they're getting a misrepresentation of what's going on. And I think in that case, that's actually more dangerous because people can believe things that are not true that can actually lead them to have if they believe that immigrants are storming our borders and it's not really that big of a problem, when that fear is incited, it can cause them to adopt some harmful thinking. So I think that with this digital era, I had that comment of this disinformation era. It's something that is problematic because we have a division of those that believe in real news and those that think that real news is fake news. And I think that's part of the division that you're seeing in the U.S.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Maybe audience have any more questions?
The gentleman in the back there.
Yes, I heard your criticism earlier of Facebook as an echo chamber of sorts. Oh, thank you. My question is, in this day and age, with social media just everywhere, is it ever really going to be possible to get back to that objective news consumption? We're all shaped by the opinions of the people we follow,
right.
Family members, friends. Even if you are reading The Economist and The Washington Post, you're also checking your Facebook, you're checking your Instagram and your Twitter, where friends, family, other sources are forever playing the role of judge and jury in a millisecond.
Yeah, we all have a
crazy
uncle posting crazy, like the earth is flat or something. You're like,
right, we've bitten the apple. Is there ever a return to the Garden of Eden, right?
Well, I think it was very worrisome for a while because it seemed like that this was just going to be the new normal. But Facebook is facing a lot of scrutiny right now, and I think they're under pressure to rid. I don't think you're going to get rid of fake news or distorted news or biased news 100%, but certainly they could do better to improve their algorithms, to fact check their sites, to make it so it's not so much of this echo chamber. And there's been some reporting and public pressure because it's acting as a business, but their stocks had actually gone down after some negative reporting and the ways in which their platforms were abused by hostile foreign powers and by neo-Nazis and just unsavory characters. So there is a demand for accountability. My last thing there. So I think with that demand and with that scrutiny, that we are going to hopefully see some changes. Anybody else?
Well, although we didn't get to see the video of your resignation, I do remember it, and I do respect you for...
I'm kind of glad it didn't play.
Well, maybe in the end we will get to see it. But I have a question on terminology. I noticed in the beginning of your speech you mentioned the conflict in Ukraine. Then later you talked about the war in Ukraine. And I've noticed in the Western press there is... I mean, very often you talk about the conflict as if, two sides, they fight about something, when it's really... I mean, it really is a war. I mean,
yeah,
it's illegal
10,000 people
annexation
have died.
Against international law, and yeah, just about the importance of using the right terminology.
It is, and that's a good point you bring up. And I think that in the U.S. we're so preoccupied with what's going on, like the latest scandal in the news, that unfortunately I think. A lot of journalists, unless you really follow what's going on in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, or even what's going on here in the Baltics, I'm interested because I've visited a few times and I realize how important it is for for the Baltic countries to be a part of NATO. You know, it's not. You have the board. The threat is not very far away from you. So I think it's not abstract. In the U.S., they're like it's way overtime for you. They're like it's party. We got drinks waiting. Hurry it up. Okay. Oh. But I think that you have a good point there, in that that Western journalists, as he used, they can be a little bit lazy because there's just so much going on that they are not fully. It's only when something, for example, what happened in the Black Sea, where journalists are playing catch up.
But isn't that like big media, like the New York Times, the Washington Post, they do have journalists concerned?
They do.
About these.
I think I'm talking more about cable news. Yeah, they're not so much focused on it. So, did you not have a microphone this whole time?
No, I did.
Oh, okay. But that's a really good point.
So, any more questions? This is your last chance for questions.
Everybody wants to go to the after party right now, I think.
Okay, then please applause for our guest and our speaker. And Andris has a name day today. I don't know how it's called in English. So Andris, you have a present, and guess what? It's a fortune cookie. Here you go. And you must read the fortune.
You must read it, and don't
Yeah.
make a mess like me.
People already made a mess here. We just cleaned it up so nobody can see.
No. I don't know. Well, thanks, guys. Let's go get a drink now.
Well, Andris, what's your fortune?
Oh, wait, I'm like wrapping this up. It's not my business to wrap.
You have not failed. You have just found 1,000 ways that don't work.
Yes.
I like that. Don't stop believing, guys.
Yes. Happy
That's
name
a Journey
day, Andris.
song.
For democracy, I guess.